Welcome back. So we now know how to get asset packs into our projects. We even know how to import FBX files and textures and other files into the project. But what happens if we have another project that has assets that we want to move to our project? This is actually a pretty common scenario. As I mentioned, some of the assets in the marketplace are full-on projects. And if you go to the Samples tab, these are also full Unreal Engine projects. The content examples is a pretty nice one, and you may find that sometimes you download these sample projects and you want some of those assets to be moved into your project. So we're going to talk about how to do that. Now, in order to show this, I need another project. I already have my Section 1 project. Now I'm going to create another project so I can move some assets into my project. To do that, I'm just going to go to Library and I'm going to launch Unreal Engine. Now I'm going to go to Games and I'm going to select the first person template project. I'm going to create this one from scratch. It's going to be its own complete project. I'm going to put it in my UE5 projects folder right next to my Section 1 project. And I'm simply going to call this FPS for first person shooter. I'll go ahead and create that. So here's the first person template project, and if I press play, I can play it. Here's the weapon for the first person template project, and if I hover over it, I get a gun and I can shoot it, and it's pretty nice. Now I'm going to hit escape to exit the Pi session. Now let's say that this project has something that I want to move over to my project, my Section 1 project. Now you may be wondering, can't I just find one of the files in this project, copy it, and paste it on over to one of the folders in my project here in the Explorer? And for the raw file types, that is fine. You can do that. Let's say that I want one of the textures on the material on this gun, for example. Well, I can find the mesh and see what material it's using. Now, you may be tempted to right-click on the gun and browse to the asset, and wait a minute, this isn't a mesh that we're familiar with. It's not a static mesh. It says Blueprint class. We haven't gotten into Blueprint classes just yet. So we're going to stay away from the Blueprint class until we learn what those are. We need to find the mesh. So I'm going to go to Content. I'm going to search. If I choose Static Mesh, well, these are the only static meshes in the project. So that means that this is not a static mesh. It's actually a skeletal mesh. A skeletal mesh is like a static mesh, except it has additional information such as a skeleton. And that allows this mesh to be more dynamic. Parts of the mesh can move relative to the other parts according to that skeleton. Let's take a look at that skeletal mesh. I'm going to go to my filters. I'm going to uncheck static mesh, and I'm going to choose skeletal mesh to see all the skeletal meshes in my project. And we have a set of arms, and we have this gun, SKFP gun. I'm going to double click it, and here is the skeletal mesh editor, which is a lot similar to the static mesh editor, but one of the most important differences is the skeleton tab. There's a skeleton, which is a hierarchy of what we call bones. And the bones are often skinned to the mesh, which means when the bone moves, part of the mesh will move with the bone. Now I'm going to hold Alt and left click to rotate around to see the gun in profile and show you that if I select one of the bones, let's click on the clip bone, I can move this clip bone. I have snapping enabled, so as I rotate, I'm rotating the bone with snapping enabled, but I can hit W and I can move that clip away. Notice that the bone that it's attached to is stretching because that bone is connected to another bone, the grip bone, and there's a hierarchy. So this is how animations are typically handled. We have a skeletal mesh that has bones, and pieces of the mesh are skinned to those bones, which means when the bone moves, that part of the mesh will move as well. Now, if you're following along exactly and you've done this, don't worry. You don't have to place that clip bone right back to where it was. If I close out of the skeletal mesh editor and open it back up, it's right back where it belongs. So moving the bones here in the skeletal mesh editor is not a permanent process. But notice in the Asset Details panel, we have a material slots, just like skeletal meshes have, and this gun has a material. Now, if I browse to that, Here's the material. It's called MFP Gun. I can even double click it and I can see all the crazy fancy things that are done in this material, things that we haven't learned about, but we can go ahead and close that. Now, let's just say that I think, well, maybe I want this material over in my project. Can I just copy it in the Explorer and paste it on over? Can I just right click and show an Explorer to show that .u asset? And can I just bring up my other project and go in its content folder and stick it in there? Copy and paste, right? Well, let's see what happens if we do that. I'm just going to copy the .u asset, Control C, and then click over here in the content folder, Control V, and paste it right there. Let's see what happens if I now open my section1.u project. Okay, well, let's go to the content folder and let's see what we got. Looks like I have a filter in place. It's for static mesh. I'm going to uncheck that. Now, I do have a U asset. It's a material. Unreal Engine even recognizes that, but it doesn't quite look right, does it? It looks black, or at least dark. And if I double click on it, well, these little red triangles indicate that there are some errors. It says that we're missing some things. So this is not a complete material. In fact, our texture samples, which have names here, they're referencing textures that don't exist in this project. So those references are broken. So just copying and pasting a U asset from within the Windows Explorer is not a good idea. And that's simply because there's a folder structure that it's supposed to adhere to, and it doesn't know where those textures are. They don't exist in this project. So what we can do is just go ahead and delete that. I'm going to go ahead and right click on it, hit delete, get rid of it. And now we don't have that. If we go to our content folder, it's gone. So how do we properly get an asset from one project to another? Well, the answer is we migrate the asset. Let's learn how to do that. I'm going to go back into my FPS project, and I'm going to find this skeletal mesh. Now, I have it open in my skeletal mesh editor. I can browse to its location in my content folder with the Browse To icon at the top left. If I click on it, there it is. There's the skeletal mesh. It's this that I want to migrate over to my other project. To do that, I right-click on it and go to Asset Actions. And under Asset Actions, there's a Migrate option. If I click on that, we get an asset report. Now, this is why migrating is the way to do it, because when I try to migrate the skeletal mesh, it's going to realize that that skeletal mesh is using a material, MFP Gun, and that material is using other assets. So all of the things that are referenced by this asset are here in the list. And I could uncheck some of them if I want to migrate only some of these. If I want to migrate this gun and not break anything, I need to migrate all of this stuff. So I'm going to click OK, and it's going to ask me, where do I want to migrate this to? I have to find the other project. So here's my Section 1 project. Now, this step is very important. When you migrate assets, you can only migrate to the content folder of another project. You can't put it inside of some other folder in the content folder. You can't put it in another folder. You have to choose content and content only, and then click select, and it will be migrated over. Let's jump on over to the other project, our Section 1 project, and go to its content folder, and notice that we now have an FP weapon folder. This was where the weapon was in the other project's content folder. It had an FP weapon folder. That's the only way you can migrate. It's going to bring through the entire folder structure all the way up to content. And if you already had an FP weapon folder, then the migrated assets will go into that FP weapon folder. So now we have this FP weapon folder. We can go to Mesh, we can go to SKFP Gun, we can take a look, and its material is intact. We can browse to that material, we can open it up, and there are no errors, no references have been broken. Those textures are still there. We've maintained all of the references in the folder structure because we went through the migration process in the Unreal Editor. So now we have this FP Gun in our project. So that's how you migrate assets from one project to another. you can actually migrate entire levels. If I go back to my FPS project, I can find a map. Let's go to the filters and uncheck skeletal mesh and check level. Here's this first person map. That's where we are. I can right click on that and go to asset actions, and I can choose migrate. But notice if I do that, we're not only going to migrate the level asset, we're going to migrate every single asset inside that level. And that could be quite large. So only do this if that's what you want. It's going to migrate everything in the level. Now you can go and uncheck things that you don't want to migrate as well. So that's an option. I'm not going to do that, but that's how you migrate a level. And not only that, but you can migrate entire folders. Let's say I want this first person folder, or perhaps this level prototyping folder. Now we don't see anything because of the filters. Let's uncheck the filters. But now we have the level prototyping folder. Really, any of these folders we can migrate. All we have to do is right click on the folder and select migrate. And once again, the asset report will show us these are all the assets in that folder and in folders inside of it. So while yes, you can uncheck entire folders or individual assets and only migrate what you want, just be aware that the migration process will result in migrating everything in this list. So now you know how to migrate assets from one project to another, and that's a very useful skill to have, as you may download something from the marketplace that is an entire project, and you may want to migrate only specific items from that project into your project. Now, we saw that a new folder was created, in this case, FP Weapon. You could go and rename this now or create another folder and move things into it. So you don't have to stick to that folder structure, but you do have to keep in mind that you can only migrate to a content folder in a project. So now that we know how to migrate assets, we can continue. I'll see you soon.